listening to Power Producers Shop Talk, where we are refining and redefining the sales game by equipping you with the tools you need to differentiate yourself in the marketplace.
Listening to the podcast is only going to get you so far. Why not take your game to the next level? Check out Power Producer Basecamp on killingcommercial.com today.
Tactical skills that'll help you provide deliverable value to your clients and prospects.
Want to have the sweet swag that we send out from the Power Producers podcast for your clients and employees? Check out policyt.com today.
And action items that you can provide to take your prospects and clients to the next level.
Want to create an online presence but don't know how to start? Check out crushingcontent.com. It's done for you, so all you have to do is show up.
This is Power Producer Shop Talk, production redefined. Are you ready to feel the power?
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Power Producer Shop Talk, where we bring you all the sexy topics on a Friday morning while you're at the gym trying to figure out how you're going to get fit enough to fit in that pair of jeans for happy hour at 5 o'clock tonight. We're going to get you all lathered up talking about workers' compensation classifications. My God, try and contain yourselves. We're back with Kevin Ring, lead analyst at the Institute of Work Comp Professionals. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about is workers' comp class codes. I mean, I think that at least in my end of the business, it's probably the biggest thing we face, especially when you go in and deal with a new prospect and you're not 100% certain that everything kind of passes muster in terms of what's on the policy versus what the actual operations are. And I've had the privilege, tongue-in-cheek, to participate in quite a few. I wouldn't say quite a few. That sounds like an abnormal amount, but I've probably been through 5 or 6 NCCI audits over the course of my career. And it's just not a fun process. It's not like, you know, they're mean and nasty and horrible. They're just extremely thorough, and they probably don't need to be there unless we haven't done something right or our predecessors haven't. And, you know, in the situations where I've been involved, a couple of them have been, you know, quote unquote random, where NCCI just reaches out and says, we've not been out to your business before. We want to understand what you're doing, da 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 da. But in other cases, it's almost like binding arbitration. You know, you're at gridlock with a carrier. You're in the account all the time. You know what they do. You've read the scopes manual. You're 100%, you know, this is where this needs to be. And the underwriter's like, nope, no, it's not, you know, da da da. All right, fine. We'll call it. It's like calling dad in to referee the fight in the living room. We'll call NCCI and let them figure it out. You know, here's the thing. This is one of the reasons why, and I know that y'all think I'm nuts when I say this, but I promise you, if you go through an NCCI audit, especially if you end up being wrong, news shock, I did not win one of the ones where we wanted to bring them in, and I can talk about that. But if you want to avoid it, when you onboard a new account, and again, remember, in my firm, we're not selling based on the insurance. So by the time the insurance needs to be placed, we've already been working with them, in most cases, a few months. So we're going to interview the insurance carriers that we're going to go to, and we're going to bring them in. And I want them to touch and feel the account. And I'm going to have the underwriter there. I'm going to have their loss control person there. I'm going to have somebody from claims there. Guess who else I'm going to bring? Somebody from their audit department. And the reason why I do that on the front end is if there is any question at all about what a code should be, I want to know that that carrier has a problem with it before we bind a policy and put it into effect. And we're operating under false pretenses, maybe not the best term because it has some legal connotations, but operating under inaccurate information. And I know it's weird, and a carrier might even look at you like you have an eyeball in the middle of the forehead, but I can promise you, if you explain yourself as to why you want that person there, they will make sure that that person's there. So all that to be said, Kevin, grip and rip, man. Classifications.
Oh, it is a fun and exciting topic. And you bring up an excellent point, and that is an amazing process that you have. And you know that it is unusual because most agents, and I'm speaking broadly across the industry, you know, they spend a lot of time talking to a business owner about how great they are, and you know, subtly explaining why the schlub they're working with now doesn't deserve their business. And then they say, hey, can I have your deck sheets? They copy down the class codes that are on there and then submit the application, which is like cheating off the test of the guy fails everything, right? Like if this other agent isn't as good as you, why are you copying their work? Now, I'm not going to tell you that their work is incorrect. They may have gotten it right, or they may have inherited something that's correct. But in every state outside of Pennsylvania and Delaware, there are north of 500, in some states 600 classifications. And so there's a lot of opportunity for things to be incorrect. And just because something was correct 5 years ago doesn't mean that it's correct today. Classifications change, and businesses change. With classifications, we've gotten a lot of calls over the last 24 months about NCCI's change to code 8720, which added construction estimators to code 8720 because that was being handled inconsistently by insurance companies. And now people are getting audited, and they had their estimators in outside sales, and now they want to put them in 8720. And is that correct? Well, yes, it is, because the classification changed. In the same way, in most states, I guess it's been maybe 5 or 6 years ago now, they got rid of, what was it, goodness gracious, long haul and short haul trucking. There used to be separate codes, 7228 and 7229, and they got combined into code 7219 in most states, which is just trucking NOC. Those codes completely went away. And the rating bureau, NCCI specifically, has been kind of paring down the classification system, getting rid of some things that just didn't have all that much payroll feeding into them. So we have to stay on top of that. And so in order to stay on top of it, you obviously have to know how the system works. So outside of construction, agriculture, staffing, and oil field services, those have their own special rules. But outside of those 4 types of businesses, we classify the business. We do not classify the individual job activities inside of the business. So as a simple example, if I've got a manufacturing company and I employ a full-time janitor / maintenance person, I don't put that person in the janitorial code. That's a code for businesses that perform janitorial services. They go into the manufacturing code. Now, there are some types of employment that are so common amongst most businesses that they are often allowed to be classified separately. And those are called the standard exception classifications. That's clerical, outside sales, drivers, although drivers are not a standard exception in California, and I think Pennsylvania and Delaware as well. And then you have automobile salespeople. But I say that they're generally allowed to be classified separately because sometimes those standard exceptions are included in the governing classification. Most common among these is drivers. You'll see a classification that says blah, 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 and drivers. By including and drivers in the title of the code, that is telling you that drivers are not a standard exception for that classification, and any drivers have to go into the governing code. I imagine many of you listening insure churches or schools. That's going to be code 8868, which covers schools, colleges, religious institutions, and a few other things, the professional employees and clerical. So the clerical people working in a school or in a church don't go into 8810, they go into 8868. And this brings up the importance of reading the classifications. The 4, 5, 6 word title of the classification that is on the deck sheet does not tell you everything that's in that code. The clerical code from NCCI, if you print it out, at least the old version of the scopes manual, it was over 3 pages, single spaced in about a 10-point font, defining exactly what is and is not a clerical employee. And NCCI in particular does a very good job of being incredibly specific about what is and is not included in their classifications. It's great to have access to the scopes manual, although NCCI has dramatically improved their free class code lookup. You might also have access to Reference Connect or something that has the scopes manual built in. If you have a printed scopes manual in your office, I would check the copyright on that, because I'm not sure NCCI is putting those out anymore, and you
Dude, it's
really
only
can't.
$100 to buy it every year anyhow. You can have
Right.
it digital, right? So I
Yeah,
mean, that's
I
money
think
well spent.
the subscription now, to get the scopes, the basic manual, and the experience rating plan, is like $249 a year for the agency. You know, they dropped the price dramatically about 18 months ago. It used to be closer to $1,000 a year per person. But now it's crazy cheap. And of course, all the independent bureaus, well, California, New York, Delaware, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Michigan, New York, all have all their manuals online for free. So if you're working in those states, you don't have to pay any money to get your hands on that. But you have to read the codes, and then you have some codes that pair with other codes. You know, what I'm not saying is that every business should have one governing class code and then maybe clerical and sales, and that's it. When you get down into how a business operates, you can have multiple codes for a variety of reasons. But you have things like 8868 that I mentioned, which is for professional employees and clerical. Then you have 9101, which is for the non-professional employees, and the code is very specific about who's professional and who's not. Manufacturing is notoriously difficult to classify because some of the codes are based on what you make, some are based on what you make it from. So like, for instance, if you're making railing for a staircase and it's made of aluminum, that's a different code than if you're making it from steel. It's certainly going to be a different code if you're making a widget and you're machining it from billets that you buy and then put into, a piece of equipment to mill down, versus if you're melting the metal and casting it, right? Even if you're making the same widget at the end of the day, those are going to be different codes. And that brings up an important point of the importance of understanding in a really meaningful way what it is that your client does and how they do it. Not just, oh, they make widgets, or, whatever. You need to understand not, what it is they are doing and how they do it. Because that's going to really let you understand how things should be classified. I want to highlight construction out of those 4 types of industries that have different rules. And these same rules apply to oil field services as well. In those industries, you generally can separate the payroll based on individual job activities. However, it depends on the classification. Ultimately, the wording of the classification has the final say in how this works. So theoretically, if I was a handyman and I fixed someone's toilet this morning and I patched a roof this afternoon and then I hang some drywall tomorrow, if I keep the records of how much I was paid for each of those activities, I could separately classify each of those and apply that payroll to the appropriate code. If I don't keep the records, everything goes into the highest rated code. Now, some people hear this and then miss the next part, which is that you have codes like 5645, which is for residential construction and carpentry, residential carpentry under 3 stories. And that code is very specific in that it says all employees of the general contractor or the carpentry contractor in charge of the job go into 5645 when they are doing any type of carpentry operation. And then it goes on to list more than a dozen different carpentry related operations for that fit under that. So if you've got a contractor that is using all their own employed labor to do all the work, then the people doing the framing go in 5645, as do the people installing the cabinets, as do the people putting up the drywall, as do the people doing the finished carpentry. All of that goes into 5645. Where if I'm using an insured subcontractor to come in and hang the drywall, and they have their own insurance, they can go in the drywall specialty trade code. But if the contractor's employees are doing that, it all goes in 5645. So you have to read the code to really understand how it works. And some insurance companies and agents will refer to that as a job classification. I get why that phrasing works. You just have to make sure the insurance company doesn't stretch it too far. And if you happen to have someone that's doing literally everything, carpentry, electrical, plumbing, whatever, the things that aren't carpentry still go in separate codes as long as you keep the records.
Yeah, I mean, the one that I had with NCCI, I've talked about it a couple of times on the podcast in the past, but this one specifically was manufacturing the plastic clamshell containers for produce. So we had an extrusion category because they would have the little pellets of plastics that would be melted down and then rolled into sheets. And then those sheets would be put into the thermoforming machines, which was a different class code where, they mold the plastic and punch it and make the actual container with it. And the point of contention with this one was they had a labeling operation that was under the same roof. It was cordoned off. It had, a dividing rails around it. You had to have an employee ID to get in there. That you had to swipe to open the gate to get in. And they not only made labels for the plastics, the containers that were being thermoformed, but if there were containers that they weren't set up to make that their clients had to get elsewhere, they would run just labels for their clients and sell them only the labels. And NCCI's issue was that it was a massive, it was a couple 100,000 square foot facility. Their issue was they were all under the same roof and they wanted to put them in the governing class code. And my argument was they don't have the same exposure because they have an isolated workspace that has been partitioned off that you can only get into by having an employee ID that gets you into that section. And they're never going up to and this is like kind of in the back right corner. They're never going up to the front or the middle to where they would do any of these other things. And they did not agree with that. And the carrier said, we want NCCI to come in and do the audit. NCCI came in and did the audit. And they said, you know what? We actually agree with the carrier. They should go in the governing code. But if you would have them create a separate entity for the printing operation as an LLC, as opposed to having it be a department, and they ran the payroll through that entity so that those people had their payroll isolated, then we can leave that code on the policy. And that ended up being what we did. I'm still irritated. I'm still irritated about it to this day because at the end of the day, it's the exact same thing that they were always doing operationally. We just made a client have to jump through hoops, because anything that they would have been worried about could still have happened, right? Like, I don't know. I didn't understand the semantics behind it then. I really don't want to try and understand it now because it was irritating. But we ended up solving the problem, and thankfully the carrier was amicable about doing that. But I also was kind of like, why didn't you just tell us that up front instead of dragging them through NCCI?
Yeah, that's a weird situation, and it's frustrating when you get into those disputes, and getting for folks in NCCI and NCCI connected states, the classifications on a policy are generally the result of a discussion / negotiation between the agent, the employer, and the insurance company. And if everybody agrees, it doesn't even matter if it's correct. I mean, it does matter, but it doesn't matter to anyone involved right then. If everybody's happy with where it's classified, then it just goes on. And I dealt with a really interesting situation right before COVID that illustrated something really important. And it was I'm not going to tell the whole story because it's not worth the time. But this is important not only in the context of a rating bureau inspection. And in NCCI, those are infrequent, but in states like Pennsylvania and Delaware and California, where the rating bureau is far more involved in setting classifications, then this probably becomes even more important. And that is when it comes time for your client to talk to either an inspector or much, much more frequently, a premium auditor, it is really important that they understand the classification that they're in. We spend a lot of time in what we do, and David, I know this is important to you as well, talking to agents about speaking the insured's language, right? Get rid of as much insurance talk as you can. But there are times where it is really, really important that the insured understands the language that's important in our world. And in this particular case, the issue at hand was that a property manager, they owned and managed a good number of residential rental properties. And they employed a maintenance staff. And these maintenance folks did not do any degree of new construction or alterations. They actually used a union contractor to do that, and they were not a union shop. But internally, they referred to all of these folks as carpenters. They did a lot of student housing. So a drunk kid kicks a hole in the wall, they would come in and patch the drywall. Somebody breaks the sink, they come in and fix that. They were just handymen, really. But internally, they called them carpenters. For more than 2 decades, they had these people in the carpentry code when they should have been in the property management code, because they were doing ordinary maintenance and repair, which is included in the property management code if you're also doing the janitorial at those properties. And the reason that happened, and the thing that ultimately got the code switched when a new agent came in and took over the business, is that they said, these people are not carpenters, they are maintenance people. You can call them whatever you want in your day-to-day in the office, but when you're talking to anybody from the insurance company, or in this case, NCCI got involved, those are maintenance people. And these folks never paid more than $150,000 in premium. And we were fighting over 7 years as we were working through this, and they were overcharged, by the math I did, about $350,000.
That's
to
a
put
big
it simply,
discrepancy, man.
Yeah, because of how they referred to these individuals, and no one involved was asking follow-up questions about what these folks did. Oh, they're carpenters, okay, 5645, let's go. And that was it. And so in those situations, and it's another place this comes up a lot in construction, is code 5606 for executive supervisors. And it's a wildly overused code, but to qualify to be an executive supervisor, you have to be exercising supervision through designated site foreman, not supervising the individual employees doing the work. And if your client has an employee or multiple employees they want in that code, they need to be prepared to use the wording of that classification to describe the work that they do. because
We
insurance
had it,
companies,
man. We had it. We had one.
yeah,
It was or have one. It's an electrical contractor. They do not have the title foreman. They have lead electrician is what they use. And when the auditor showed up, they were looking for the terminology, and this is the carrier auditor, not NCCI. They were
yeah.
looking for the terminology. Where's your foreman? And they don't have that. They had a lead electrician who was operating as a foreman, but the auditor didn't hear that word, and so they wanted to put that all that payroll, which by the way, typically higher compensated people from 5606 into the electrical contractor payroll, the wiring within buildings, whatever the number is. And we're like, that's not the case. Well, no, they didn't say. I mean, it was a knockdown drag out, and I had to like get my client to give me a very descriptive email of exactly what these people were doing. And they didn't want to call them foremen. There was a reason. I don't remember what the reason was, but they just didn't want to. They didn't want that job title. And all the mechanics were 100% correct, but the terminology wasn't, and it's caused a bit of grief in an audit as a result of that. But you're 100% right. I think 5606 is incredibly overused and improperly, because it used to be that the qualification was if you're in 5606, do you swing a hammer? Do you do any work? And it goes a little bit into more detail than that. But I think that a lot of people would just say, "Oh, well, you're just driving around checking job sites or whatever else." No, you're 5606. You're an executive supervisor.
Right. I mean, 5606 is intended for people who sit in a construction trailer at a large job site. It is not intended for your residential general contractor. And I used to have a neighbor and he's still in that business. He's just not my neighbor anymore. And he dressed like an insurance agent every day, polo and khakis. And, but then one day I saw him walking down the street and he looked a little rough. And I was like, well, what happened? He said, well, some guys called in sick, so I had to get up on a roof and help get the job done. Well, that's how most smallish businesses, period, but contractors specifically, when all hands need to be on deck, I can't imagine there's very many general contractors who don't know how to build things, right? They just wound up owning a business where they aren't the ones swinging the hammer day to day. But the mechanics of that code are very, very particular. And again, if you want to get an employee of your client into that code, they better be ready to explain the functions of that position in wording that fits right in with it, because insurance companies are specifically looking for that one.
Yep. I mean, it's a red flag, honestly.
Right.
It's not, they don't just say, oh, great, 5606, awesome. The other one, and you referenced it earlier, and I don't know that it's being completely misused yet, but I have a feeling it will be if it's not already, and that's that 8720 code. Like it captures a lot. And I've seen roofing companies that have 8720 on the workers' comp policy because they sub out allegedly 100% of the 5551, but they have the inspectors that are going to go do roof inspections or things like that, and so they put it on the policy. And if you do have a guy that happens to go up there and he's on the roof and falls off, it's contemplated in that code, man, because I write a pretty good sized public adjusting firm that's literally what their code is. Almost everybody on the policy, other than the office people, is that 8720. And I just, that one scares me to death. And we actually have carriers that will not write that code.
Well, and what happened with 8720 is that some insurance companies were happy to put the estimators, people who are purely estimating, in 8742. I just talked to someone the other day on this. They had it was a renovation contractor. These were not people that were getting up on roofs. They were not going in basements. They were sitting down with people and saying, how do you want to redo your kitchen? Let's look at all the cabinets and figure out what the price is going to be. and now the insurance company wants to put them in 8720, which is correct. But some insurance companies would take anyone in that estimator role and want to put them in the classification that matched the work they were estimating. And say what you want about the rating bureaus, they don't like their class codes being used inconsistently, and that messes with their data. So they said, well, we know how we're going to fix this. We are going to create something we haven't had before, which is a specific code for estimators. And you can actually separate that payroll. You can have someone with 8720 payroll who does swing hammers or do whatever else, but what they can't do is estimate a job and then work on that same job. They can estimate a job and then go work on a different job. The records on that are going to be a nightmare, but you could do that. But they're trying to split the difference because you're talking about people getting up on roofs that may not be especially sturdy. It's certainly more risky than outside sales, but it's less risky than being up on the roof, doing the work. And they can't have a roofing estimator versus a this or versus that estimator. They got to put it all together. So some people make out really well in that transition, and other people not so much. But at least it's consistent, and where it's supposed to go.
Yeah, 100%. What else can we say about classifications, man?
Well, there's a lot more to say, but I think we've covered the most important points, and hopefully folks will dig into those class codes after listening.
Listen, if nothing else, people, you understand Kevin knows what he's talking about. And if you want to learn to go deep in workers' comp, this is the guy you want to do it with. So I would encourage you to reach out to Kevin individually or through the Institute of Work Comp Professionals website to learn more. Their program's outstanding. It's something that I require all my people to go through, and it certainly helps us. But probably the most valuable thing is just the ongoing education and the resource that Kevin is to the agent community. And you can't put a price tag on that. So thanks again for coming on, Kevin. Really appreciate it. And everybody else, we'll catch you next time. See ya.
Well, my pleasure.